Yes,
Hey, welcome to episode 6 that we
that's
decided
what we decided.
to. So
So
here's
if
a
it's not
question.
next week, will be 6 and
Well, we'll go 5 and come back
6A.
ahead.
Yeah.
So, okay. All right. So this is a question that we've talked about a number of times. It's kind of a challenging question. And the question is if somebody talks to you about a challenging uh, trauma, right? They come and express trauma to you. That trauma can fall within a large spectrum, right? From a little thing to very, very, very traumatic instance, but it's different for everybody, right? So the question is how do you help people calibrate their trauma? In other words, how do you help set it to reality of how much of a trauma it is without negating their feelings and without making them feel bad and feel unheard? So let's say I come in, I'm like, oh my gosh, I broke a fingernail, right? That's pretty dramatic for some people and other people. Is that a bad example?
No, I'm wondering if we need to reword the question a little
Okay.
bit because our bodies respond if somebody broke their fingernail and they genuinely feel like that was traumatic, their body and mind will react as though that were trauma, and you can't tell them that they weren't feeling
Yeah.
trauma.
Okay.
So I don't think it's a matter of calibrating it for them as much as maybe helping them empathizing with their trauma, even though you maybe don't think, maybe that's the question. How do you empathize with somebody who's experiencing a trauma that maybe you don't think is trauma? Or maybe because there's some people that go through so much, you're like, why is that not traumatic to you? Like if
Yeah.
what you were going through happened to me, I would be traumatized.
Maybe that's a good point. Maybe we should change the question too is should we calibrate trauma? Or should we just let every person's interpretation of trauma be that?
Well, I know in my one of my very first classes, that was like I don't remember what it was called. Obviously, I learned so much in that very first classes. Whatever was called is whatever
You were
you.
saying that you were learning 6 plus 6 is 12.
I have a 4.0, so. But if somebody's experiencing something and they think it's a trauma,
So if you get avitis, that's a trauma.
I have a 4.0. So, see how I just reacted there?
Yes, I did.
To me, that would be a trauma. It may not be a trauma to
I
you.
no doubt whatsoever that it would be a trauma for you to get
Yeah, it would kill me. Really kill me. So yeah, how do you empathize? And I learned today in reading a book the difference between sympathy and empathy. One of the differences on the therapy side of things is when you sympathize with somebody, you're agreeing with them. You're saying, like somebody's like, I shouldn't have to go to school. My teacher's mean, and you're like, you're right. Your teacher is so mean. So that's sympathy, but in a therapeutic way, you should offer empathy, which is like, I don't necessarily agree with you skipping school, but that the feelings that you're having, like your teacher's mean to you, that's worth valid feelings.
even though they're
Yeah,
not.
even though.
That's why you're
And
a
this is why
therapist,
you're an engineer, and I'm going. So I think that's it. Like if somebody comes to you with something they think is traumatic, even if it's just a broken fingernail, maybe they just spent, or maybe they got a gift card to get their fingernails done. They can't afford to get their fingernails done, and it costs like maybe $80, and that fingernail they'd just gotten done broke. We don't understand the world which they're coming from for that to have been traumatizing for them.
Okay. Well, and I like that example. I think sometimes I'm not sure if we're answering the question, but I think it's a good
It's a good
discussion,
discussion.
right?
That's what most of our questions turn into in
Yeah.
reality.
Okay. So, you know, maybe that's the question is how much is trauma that's not to somebody and that is to somebody else, how much is that justified? And I don't agree with, I'm sorry, I don't doubt you. I meant I do agree with
Don't
you.
agree with you.
I don't disagree with you, and I do agree with you that to them it is a real trauma, right? And I don't negate that, but at the same time, how much um, how much it influences other people make a big difference, right? I'm sorry, I'm getting a phone call. That looked like I was poking somebody in the face.
Yeah.
So like I was thinking about this when we were thinking about the question. Whenever we hear about bullying is often a very traumatic experience, right? And people talk about, oh, I was bullied when I was a kid. And so I've thought about that, and I think back in my life, and I thought, oh, I have been bullied in here and here and here and here, right? Because in my mind, being a nerdy, kind of dorky kid, that's, I look back at my pictures and I was obviously dorky. I still like nerdy things, right?
Wish I had your senior picture.
And so you would expect that I would be traumatized, bullied, right? That I would be bullied in school. And I guess if I look deep enough, I can go and say, oh, hey, yeah, this was bullying. But when I was actually growing up, I never thought that I was bullied. Maybe one instance that I can think of that I was maybe bullied, but even then, it was just a kid, being a jerk. And I even made the mistake to kind of put him in that situation, right? And so I look at it and I'm like, okay, am I creating a trauma in my mind and bullying because, hey, somebody else is saying that, defining that for me, and I'm looking back and creating a trauma because I'm like, oh, I should have been bullied. Maybe I was bullied. And so that trauma was created by the environment that I was in. Does that make sense? And I think that's, it brings up your example with the breaking the fingernail, right? If I break a fingernail, there's times I'm like, crap, this is not good because maybe I'm doing stuff at work and it's going to catch on to things and it's going to be a pain or it hurt me pretty much. And there's other times I'm like, all right, so it kind of depends on the environment and what the situation is too. So I guess the question is, trauma can be affected by the event. It can be affected by your environment and the situation you're in, and it can be affected by other people's perception of it and actually convinces you whether it's trauma or not trauma. Would you agree with that?
Yep. I think that's all, like, as I was even reading in my book chapter about empathy.
You're just all smart referring to books.
This one's down my alley. Your one last week, not down my alley. This one's down my alley. Empathy is all that, like understanding, like viewing their world, like listening to them through their world. Because you don't know, like, how they were raised or how, we see a lot of people come into my office and I don't know all their stories because I'm the receptionist, not the therapist. But they've obviously gone through legitimate trial. And my therapist even coined, we talked about this before, like trauma can be not feeling physically safe, mentally or emotionally safe, and then like feeling love or connection or things like that. So there's like the three branches of what can cause trauma or what can help trauma. But I think helping our kids and ourselves be resilient so that we're not impacted by trauma as much.
That's a good point. So you don't necessarily deny the trauma.
Yes.
But it's how you deal with the trauma is important. Right?
Because like maybe Stephanie had an A-. She was teasing me because I had a really hard test. And I was like, I've got to get this right. And she says, I said, this college is harder than you told me it was going to be. And she goes, you care more than I do. But to me, getting an A- genuinely would kind of traumatize me because if you look at my history, I got put on probation, academic probation at Utah State. Hi, Mom. I didn't tell you that. I got put on academic probation at Utah State. I didn't graduate. I did all these things. So for me, it's really important to prove to myself that I'm good at school. So that first A- really probably, I don't know that it'll traumatize me, but it will hurt real bad. Really bad, not real bad. But that's my worldview and whether somebody else thinks that an A- is not that big of a deal, it would bother me.
Okay.
So telling somebody that's stupid, don't be bothered by it, not helpful.
Okay. So I don't know if we completely answered the question, but I like what you're saying. So for you, don't negate the trauma no matter what it is, right? You can empathize and then help them overcome it. Okay. And I guess my perspective would be, and I don't think it's counter the all, but I think we have to remember that trauma is that large spectrum, right? And I think before, and when I say before, like, 50s, 60s, even the 80s, it was like, hey kid, brush yourself off, and it's not that big a deal, and just deal with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now sometimes that pendulum is swung to the other side, that we handle people with such kit gloves that we don't address the trauma. We acknowledge it so much that we don't somehow help them overcome it. We just go and say, oh yes, you're right. And I think that pendulum's to the other side. And so I think it's the challenge is trying to find a good balance.
And I think the other challenge is knowing your place. Like if a neighbor were to come to me and share something that she feels is traumatic, it's not my place necessarily to help her overcome it. It's my place to support her, hug her, laugh, get her to laugh. That's always my go-to. But if you're like bishop, part of your responsibility as that leader in a congregation, in a ward, is to kind of help them work through that trauma. So I think looking at what your relationship is and what they call the helping process, if I'm just a neighbor or a friend, maybe my job is just support. My job isn't necessarily to help them overcome it.
There's some roles that you don't want to negate it, but you have to have them question it, you have to have them challenge it, and you have to work through it and go and say, okay, and part of that working through it is, and I guess that's why I use the word calibrate. Part of that working through it is to go and say, hey, relative to other things, how much of a trauma is it? My dear Amber, an A- is hard. And you've worked so hard for all your A's. That being said, how much do you think it would really affect your life 10 years down?
See what my therapist would say. No. I'm going to come back to what you said. Okay. You have every right to be discouraged about getting an A-. I know how hard you worked. Then I would be like, yeah. And then, yeah, I'd be like, yeah, and then he'd say, however. In 10 years, as you look back and you're...
No big buts, lots of however.
Yes, don't say big buts. But however, in 10 years, how much do you think that will impact your life? And I'll say, it depends on if it's the only A-, it will drive me crazy. But if I have lots of A-, I'll be like, hey, at least I graduated.
So the best thing going to happen is to get lots of A-.
No A-. Matter of fact, this semester, my lowest grade is a 98.8, and it's killing me because the other two are 99s.
Wow. I'm going to give you some real trauma in life. Okay. Well, I don't know if we answered the question, but we did drone on and talk for at least almost 14 minutes.
That was a good topic.
Hopefully.
That was a good topic. Okay.
Hopefully that was useful. Remember, you can always watch these at 2x speed, right?
Oh.
That's another controversy we'll have to talk about another time.
Write that down in our here's a question.
All right.
Now we're going to go golfing.
We
We don't know how to golf.
Okay. All right. Thanks. See you next time.